Hi, and welcome to the next video in our video series, the books that we have here at the archive. Today we have 4 books to talk about, and they deal with mostly the eastern end of Long Island. The first book is Know Your Town, Southampton by the League of Women Voters of Southampton. This book was put out in 1980, and it is a great little resource. It does give you a brief history of the area, and then it goes into more information. So they're talking about the township of Southampton, which is separate legal entity and governmental entity than the village of Southampton. So this is the township of Southampton. And this book gives a lot of information about how that township works. That is the governmental structure. It tells you the elected positions at the time in 1980 and how long their terms are. Some of this stuff is still valid today. So it's a great little resource if you're doing research about the town or if you have people who live there. It does give you community organizations that were around. So this is a great book if you're starting to do research, because it just gives you lists of places that could be potential record holders. That's churches. It does talk about the schools, different schools in the area, and gives you information about them. And then other things like yacht clubs, tennis courts, recreational areas, cultural activities, and then libraries. So it's a great resource of resources. A lot of them are still around today. So if you're just starting out your research, but you know that your ancestor lived in the township of Southampton, this is a great little book to give you some other places to start looking for some records. The next one is in Old Southampton. And this book is more about the founding of Southampton. It's by Abigail Fithian Halsey. Okay, so the copyright is 1940. It was first published in 1940. The second printing was in 1952, and it was reissued in 1968 by the Southampton Book Company, at least the copy I have. There might be one since then. I think you could still purchase this. So it also does have some illustrations in the book. It does have markers because I was using it for research, because 2, if not 3, of the early persons who settled Southampton in 1640 are my ancestors. It says the men who in 1640 settled Southampton, Long Island, were English Puritans who had earlier come to Lynn, Massachusetts, some for faith and some for fortune. It does give you a lot of information about the early founding of the settlement of Southampton, and then the old town of Southampton, its beginnings, its governmental origins. It does have a picture of Thomas Halsey House. The house is still standing, house built by Thomas Halsey Jr. That's still a museum. This has a lot of information about the early settlement. So if you know that you're related to one of the early settlers or had people living there, this is a wonderful, wonderful resource. It also does give a map. It tells you about what life was like. It tells you about the churches, the schools. There's a lot of names. Tells you about some early laws. A lot of information. So, good read. Great book. It does give you an index if you just want to look through quick, see if your ancestor's name is listed. But it's definitely a good read if you have a ancestor from that time period in Southampton. The next book is The Mills of Long Island. This is a fun resource for anyone who has relatives who ran a mill. This is from 1962, and it does give a table of contents with the different mills. So it says part 1 is the windmills of Eastern Long Island, and part 2 is watermills of Long Island. It also gives a map and some pictures. And then information. Who owned them, when they were built. So if you have information that says that your ancestor owned a mill in Eastern Long Island, it could be in this book. And it could give you a lot more information about what their life was like, what they used their mill for. And then it talks about the watermills. It does mention Edward Howell, who was an early settler of Southampton town. And talks about him because, as it says here, it's believed that the watermill of the town of Southampton is slightly north of the site where Edward Howell in 1644 built what was probably the first watermill in Nassau or Suffolk counties. So, you're in the Edward Howell family. This book does mention him. So, another great resource, something that we don't use much anymore. Mills, if at all. There are more museums now. I don't know any that are still used for their original intended purposes. Maybe there are. That'd be great to find out. Long Island, not that I know of. So a great resource to a job that our ancestors had or may have had. The last one is the story of Second House in Montauk. This is a much smaller book, but still lots of information. This book is by Jeanette Edwards Rattray. There's a picture. It says, Second House was built in 1797, is the oldest and most historic building still standing in Montauk. I honestly don't know if it is still standing. It might be. So it goes through the history of Second House. So it's interesting to talk about that area. Montauk, Long Island, also known as the End. So if you had ancestors out that way or in that general geographic region, this could be a good resource to find out what life for them was like, even if they didn't have anything to do with the Second House. So those are 4 great resources for looking for ancestors or history about the area if they're from the eastern end of Long Island. So thank you for watching, and as always, happy searching.